Tempers exploded last night as Karoline Leavitt, the fiery young White House press secretary, clashed live with Hollywood legend Meryl Streep in a shocking confrontation that rocked the Fox News studio, exposing dark secrets and igniting a political firestorm. The lights blazed hotter than usual, tension so thick it seemed to warp the air. From the moment Karoline Leavitt and Meryl Streep locked eyes across the gleaming desk, the atmosphere practically vibrated with hostility. The evening had promised a spirited exchange, according to the hosts, but no one could have predicted just how vicious, how personal things would get. Meryl Streep, clad in a sharp black blazer, wasted no time. Her voice, usually polished with the poise of a seasoned actress, cut the air like a serrated knife. With the cameras rolling and millions watching, she launched a searing monologue aimed directly at former First Lady Melania Trump. "I am sick and tired," Meryl spat, her hands slicing the air for emphasis, "of pretending that woman is anything but a caged bird, trapped in a golden prison. You can see it in her eyes. She has no love for that man. She looks like a hostage, in plain sight, paraded around like an ornament." The studio gasped, a live, raw noise that microphones eagerly picked up. But Meryl was just getting started. "And let us not pretend," she continued, voice rising, "that this is some tragic fairy tale. Sources I trust, have whispered for years that Melania tried to renegotiate her prenup before she would even move into the White House, that she threatened to take Barron and disappear unless she got more money, more power, more guarantees." She leaned in, her tone dropping to a chilling whisper. "What kind of marriage is it when your loyalty is bought like a bag of jewels? When you are nothing more than a well-dressed prisoner smiling for the cameras?" The host, caught in the storm, tried to interject, but Meryl pushed through like a wrecking ball. She accused Melania of having secret living arrangements during the Trump presidency, claiming she spent more nights at a hidden New York penthouse than at the White House itself. "They were never partners," Meryl insisted. "They were a brand, an image, stitched together with contracts and cold hard cash." The studio lights flickered for a fraction of a second, as if the very energy in the room had overloaded. Karoline Leavitt sat stiffly through the tirade, jaw clenched, a hand lightly tapping the desk in an effort to steady herself. Her turn was coming, and when it came, it struck like a thunderclap. With a voice edged with fury but sharpened with discipline, Karoline leaned forward, her eyes burning. "Enough," she said, a quiet statement that somehow carried more power than any shouting could have. "How dare you stand there and spin salacious lies about a woman you have never met, whose experiences you cannot begin to understand?" Meryl opened her mouth to interrupt, but Karoline was rolling now, unstoppable. "Melania Trump," she said, voice cracking with righteous anger, "is not a prisoner. She is not a puppet. She is a woman of grace, dignity, and resilience, who endured unprecedented personal attacks from the media, while carrying herself with more class than any of her critics could muster in a lifetime." Karoline's tone sharpened further. "You accuse her of being bought? Of needing to renegotiate for her dignity? That is a disgusting fabrication. Melania defended her family. She defended her son. She demanded what every mother demands: security for her child, stability for her home. And she did it quietly, without grandstanding, without victimhood, without dragging others through the mud as you have done tonight." The tension was volcanic. Meryl's face twisted in anger, her hands clutching the armrests of her chair. She tried to fire back, but Karoline raised her voice over her, the sharp, clear voice of a young leader refusing to be bulldozed. "You speak of loyalty as though you understand it. You who worship at the altar of every fleeting cause. Melania has stood by her husband through firestorms you cannot imagine, and she did so with her head high, not because of contracts, but because of conviction." The audience was holding their breath, and even the hosts, usually so quick to intervene, sat silent, stunned by the rawness of the exchange. Meryl, visibly shaken but unwilling to yield, launched back in, her words now coming faster, angrier, less measured. "You are blind, Karoline. Blind to the corruption, the rot, the soullessness," she snapped. "You defend the indefensible. You paint loyalty on a gilded cage and call it virtue." Caroline's eyes narrowed. She leaned even closer across the desk, the fire in her expression unmistakable. "I defend truth," she shot back, "and I will not stand by while you spew poison disguised as compassion. You have no monopoly on morality, Ms. Streep. You have a soapbox and an audience, and tonight you chose to use both to slander a woman who has endured more than you ever will." The room was an emotional powder keg. The debate was no longer political. It was personal, it was primal, and it was far from over. The tension built to a breaking point as Meryl, face flushed with rage, prepared to unleash another verbal barrage. Meryl Streep slammed her hand against the desk, the loud crack slicing. Through the charged silence, her composure, that polished Hollywood veneer, was crumbling live on national television. She leaned forward, her face mere inches from the microphone, and launched into a tirade that immediately turned the atmosphere from confrontational to explosive. "You are so deeply entrenched in your own delusions," Meryl hissed, her voice trembling with fury, "that you cannot even recognize the machinery of oppression you are a part of. Melania Trump sold her soul the day she chose convenience over conscience. You defend her because you must, because you have tied your destiny to a house of lies, and now you are desperate to pretend it is a temple of truth." Karoline Leavitt's expression remained frozen for a fraction of a second, eyes steady, jaw tight. Then, like a dam bursting, she responded with a force that seemed to shift the very air in the room. "You sit there," Karoline said, each word deliberate, slicing through the rage like a scalpel, "preaching about conscience from the comfort of your penthouses and award shows, looking down on the very people who built the country you pretend to mourn. You have no idea what real loyalty looks like, no idea what real sacrifice is." Her voice rose, unwavering. "You throw stones from your glass castles, fueled by your hatred for Donald Trump, and now you think tearing down his wife will somehow redeem your bitterness? It won't. It just exposes it." Meryl recoiled slightly, but her pride pushed her forward again. "I am not bitter," she snapped. "I am awake. I refuse to let people like you, like him, rewrite history while women like Melania become willing participants in their own humiliation." Karoline shook her head slowly, as if she could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You talk about humiliation," she said, voice colder now, sharper. "But the only thing being humiliated tonight is the truth. Melania Trump was not some desperate, broken woman clinging to a loveless marriage. She was a mother protecting her son, a woman standing by her husband not because she was forced, but because she chose to, in a world that mocked and hated her every step of the way." The moderator tried to intervene, offering a weak, "Ladies, perhaps we could," but neither of them heard him. Their world had narrowed to each other, two titans locked in a public battle with reputations hanging in the balance. Meryl leaned forward, voice low, dangerous. "She renegotiated her marriage like a business transaction," she sneered. "You know it. Everyone knows it. There is no loyalty in that, no love, just survival." She punctuated the last word like a dagger, daring Karoline to respond. Karoline did not hesitate. "Wrong," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "What you call survival, I call strength. What you call renegotiation, I call demanding respect." Melania Trump stood her ground. For herself, for her son, for her dignity. See, in a world determined to see her as nothing more than an accessory. She straightened in her chair, eyes blazing with conviction. You pretend to champion women, Ms. Streep, but the second a woman makes a choice you disagree with, you strip her of her agency and call her a hostage. You are not a champion of women. You are a gatekeeper of acceptable narratives. And Melania, Trump refuses to be one of your victims. The audience, initially silent, began to murmur, the tension sparking in every corner of the room. Meryl's mouth opened, but for the first time all night, no words came out. Her face twitched with the effort to contain her rage. The moderator, sensing the impending eruption, tried again. Maybe we should— Tell me, Karoline pressed, not waiting for permission. Where were your speeches about women's dignity when Melania was mocked for her accent? When she was called a trophy wife, a gold digger, a robot? Where was your outrage then? Meryl clenched her jaw. She stood beside a man who caged children, who divided families, she burst out. She wore a jacket that said, "I really don't care, do you?" To a detention center? How dare you demand sympathy for her? Karoline leaned in, voice low and deliberate, the kind of tone that demanded silence. That jacket, she said, was a protest against you, against the media, against the vultures who twisted her every move into an indictment of her soul. She knew what you would do. She knew you would tear her apart no matter what she wore, no matter what she said. And she decided to call you out without saying a single word. Meryl blinked, stunned into silence for a moment too long. Karoline seized it. You, Karoline said, voice shaking with passion, have spent your life playing pretend, dressing up as heroes and martyrs. Melania lived it, every day, under a microscope, with dignity you cannot even comprehend. Meryl rose halfway out of her chair, her face contorted with anger. I will not be lectured by a mouthpiece for corruption, she barked, jabbing a finger toward Karoline. And I will not be slandered by a bitter elitist who thinks her fame makes her righteous, Karoline shot back. The studio crackled with electric tension. Staff members along the walls exchanged wide-eyed glances. No one dared move. No one dared breathe. Meryl's hands trembled as she grabbed the arms of her chair, visibly trying to control herself. Her voice, when it came, was low and feral. You will regret standing on the wrong side of history. Karoline smiled. Not a smirk, not a gloat, but a calm, steady smile of a fighter who knows she has already landed the fatal blow. History will remember that when the world threw stones, she said, her voice clear, Melania Trump stood tall, and so did I. The room hung in stunned silence for a beat longer, and then Meryl Streep stood up so quickly that her chair clattered backward, nearly toppling over. Without a word, without a glance, she stormed off the set, her heels clacking furiously against the studio floor, the sound following her like a series of gunshots. The cameras panned awkwardly back to the stunned host, who scrambled to salvage the segment, but it was too late. The damage was done. The confrontation had spiraled beyond anything they could have controlled. In the control room, producers scrambled to mute the backstage shouting that erupted as Meryl disappeared behind the curtains. On screen, Karoline sat alone now, her expression composed, unbroken, victorious. The internet was already on fire. Within minutes, hashtags exploded across platforms. Karoline crushes it. Meltdown Streep. Stand with Melania. Commentators from across the spectrum scrambled to pick apart the wreckage of the night. But one thing was clear. A new conservative icon had just been born, and an old Hollywood legend had just watched her reputation suffer a brutal, self-inflicted wound. But the night was not over yet. The cameras kept rolling, and Karoline Leavitt, sensing her moment, leaned forward to deliver one final, devastating message directly to the audience watching at home. Karoline Leavitt sat still for a breathless second, the studio around her frozen in awkward silence. With Meryl Streep gone, her chair empty and abandoned like a battlefield relic, all eyes, all cameras, belonged to Karoline now. And she knew it. She leaned closer to the camera, the fire still burning in her eyes, and delivered her final words, with the precision of a veteran fighter who refused to waste her hard-earned moment. "To every American watching tonight," she began, her voice steady and cutting through the tension, "do not be deceived by the elites who believe they have the right to define your heroes, to rewrite your stories, to slander those who refuse to bow to them." The control room fed a tight zoom onto her face, amplifying every nuance of her emotion. "They tried it with Melania Trump," Karoline continued, each syllable hitting with measured force, mocking her accent, ridiculing her marriage, stripping away her humanity, piece by piece because they hated the man she loved. But make no mistake, their contempt for her is only a mask for their contempt for you. A soft gasp echoed faintly from the off-screen staff, realizing Karoline was no longer just defending Melania. She was indicting the entire culture of derision that so many Americans had long felt but seldom saw articulated on mainstream television. "They will call you ignorant if you disagree," Karoline said, her voice rising slightly. "They will call you evil if you fight back. They will shame you, cancel you, erase you, because your existence threatens their monopoly on virtue." The room was dead silent, save for the distant hum of equipment. Even the skeptical producers leaning toward the monitors found themselves hanging on her every word. "And tonight," she said, her hand tightening into a subtle fist against the desk, "they tried to shame me. They tried to shame Melania. And they failed." Her gaze hardened. "They failed because we will not kneel. We will not apologize for standing, for what is right, for who we are, or for who we love." The moment hung in the air like a hammer suspended mid-swing. No applause, no music, just raw, aching silence. Finally, the host managed a tight, hurried wrap-up line, thanking the audience for tuning in. But everyone knew. The real show had already ended, the moment Meryl's chair fell silent. But even off the air, the battle was far from over. Backstage was a hive of chaos. Producers whispered urgently into earpieces, scrambling for damage control. Assistants rushed to Meryl's dressing room only to find it locked from the inside. The muffled sound of furious pacing echoed behind the heavy door. Meanwhile, Karoline moved through the backstage hallway like a soldier returning from war, bruised, unyielding, and utterly sure of her ground. Cameramen, stagehands, even rival political commentators stepped aside, some nodding silently in acknowledgement, others simply staring as if unsure what to make of her. A junior producer, no older than 22, wearing an oversized headset and clutching a clipboard, caught her arm as she passed. "You were incredible," he whispered, voice trembling with emotion he barely seemed to understand. "I've never seen anything like that." Karoline offered him a brief, firm nod before disappearing down the hallway, her heels striking sharp, deliberate notes against the floor. It took less than 30 minutes for the first social media clips to hit the internet, and within an hour they had gone nuclear. Short snippets of Meryl's tirade against Melania were spliced against Karoline's brutal rebuttals, creating a sharp, visceral contrast that viewers could not turn away from. Hashtags surged and fractured, but a clear narrative emerged. Meryl Streep had unraveled, and Karoline Leavitt had stood firm. Commentators from every corner of the political sphere scrambled for airtime. Liberal pundits tried to spin the disaster, claiming Meryl had been baited. Conservative voices celebrated Karoline's unflinching strength, calling her the new face of resilience against cultural tyranny. But even outside the media bubbles, the deeper current was undeniable. Thousands of ordinary Americans, weary of lectures from Hollywood elites, saw in Karoline something they had been craving, someone who refused to apologize for defending what mattered. The fallout only intensified when exclusive backstage footage leaked, showing Meryl storming through the corridors, screaming about how idiotic, brainwashed girls like Karoline were dragging the country into darkness. The footage, grainy but explosive, only further damaged Meryl's crumbling image. Meanwhile, Karoline stayed silent for the rest of the night. No tweets, no interviews, no gloating. Her silence spoke louder than any victory dance could have. The following morning, news programs across the country opened with the confrontation. Newspaper headlines splashed bold words across front pages. Leavitt outshines Streep in stunning clash. Hollywood meets its match. The night the curtain fell, major political figures weighed in. Some liberals rushed to Meryl's defense, framing her as a passionate artist mischaracterized by an aggressive opponent. But even among them, there was an uncomfortable undertone. An admission, if only between the lines, that she had lost control, that she had gone too far. On the conservative side, Karoline was hailed not just as a spokesperson, but as a symbol. A fresh force who had stared down the monolithic weight of Hollywood condescension and refused to blink. Talk shows booked emergency panels. Podcasts recorded, late into the night. Opinion columns flooded every corner of the internet. Yet through it all, Karoline remained curiously absent from the frenzy, declining interview requests, declining gloating opportunities. The silence only added to her mystique, but behind the scenes, in private circles, preparations were already underway. Karoline's team had received an invitation. A major conservative summit wanted her to deliver a keynote address, to capitalize on the tidal wave of momentum building around her. In their invitation, one sentence stood out above all the rest. "You are the voice we have been waiting for." Back at Fox News, producers debriefed over what they now quietly called the showdown. Despite the chaos, despite the unexpected ugliness, ratings had smashed records. Everyone knew it would not be the last confrontation. Everyone knew this was just the beginning. And somewhere, behind a locked door, Meryl Streep stared at her reflection. In the dressing room mirror, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly, grappling with the sudden, terrifying reality that for the first time in her storied career, she had not just lost a battle, she had lost the room. Meryl Streep stared into the mirror, her reflection fractured by the harsh vanity lights around her. The roar of the confrontation still echoed in her ears, but now it was replaced by an eerie, hollow silence. She had lost. Not in some scripted drama where the cameras could roll again, not in a carefully directed scene where sympathetic editors could paint her as the heroine. This loss was real. Raw. Permanent. The door creaked as her publicist slipped inside, face grim, holding a buzzing phone flooded with notifications. "It's worse than we thought," the woman whispered, not daring to meet Meryl's eyes. Meryl waved her off with a brittle snap of her fingers. She didn't need to hear it. She could feel it. The disintegration of her carefully crafted image was happening faster than any scandal she had ever seen. A legend brought low not by scandalous revelations or some political misstep, but by her own fury, her own hubris, broadcast live to the world. Meanwhile, across the city, in a quiet, private room shielded from the chaos, Karoline Leavitt sat with a small team of close advisors. The exhaustion of the night pressed down on her, but she wore it like armor. Every call that came in, every new message flashing across her phone, only reaffirmed what she already knew. Something had shifted. Not just a moment, a movement. One of her senior aides set down a laptop in front of her. "You need to see this," he said quietly. On the screen, a viral montage was playing. Karoline standing firm as Meryl raged. Karoline's final words about loyalty and dignity. Meryl storming off the set. Set to a swelling, triumphant soundtrack, the video was less than 3 minutes long, but it was electrifying millions. Comments scrolled faster than the eye could follow. Finally, someone said it. "Karoline Leavitt is the future. Hollywood just met real America, and lost." Karoline leaned back in her chair, watching for a moment, the corners of her mouth lifting in the smallest hint of a smile. She was not a woman prone to gloating. Victory to her was not about shouting louder. It was about standing longer. The conversation in the room shifted quickly. Requests were pouring in. Major interviews, book deals, speaking engagements. Conservative. Leaders who had once kept their distance now wanted photo ops. Grassroots organizers were calling her the voice they had been waiting for. But Karoline raised a hand, silencing the room. "No gloating," she said firmly. "No victory laps. We are not them." The team nodded, understanding. This was not about a single battle. It was about what came next. Meanwhile, at the Fox News studio behind the scenes, the fallout continued to spread. A memo circulated among the executives. Effective immediately, certain guests, particularly high-profile celebrities with volatile reputations, would be subjected to stricter pre-show agreements. Damage control. The network had enjoyed the ratings boost, but they knew the price had been higher than expected. Whispers filled green rooms and backstage hallways. Everyone had seen it now. The fragile reality behind Hollywood's polished faces. If even Meryl Streep, queen of the silver screen, could shatter under the pressure of a young press secretary, what did that say about the institutions they had spent decades building? By the following evening, the headlines had shifted again. Meryl Streep's scheduled appearances were quietly canceled. Her publicist issued a terse statement claiming exhaustion and a need for reflection. In other words, retreat. The final blow came days later, when a respected journalist published an op-ed titled "The Night Meryl Lost Middle America." It was a brutal, unsparing piece that captured the cultural shift with surgical precision. It was not just a political clash, the article read. It was the moment when the people who feel sneered at by Hollywood finally saw someone stand up and win. Karoline, for her part, stayed true to her word. She declined most interview requests, choosing instead to issue a single statement. Through her office, "I stood up for truth, for dignity, and for every person who has ever been silenced by the arrogance of power. I will continue to stand, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary." It was the kind of message that resonated far beyond political lines. Even some centrists, weary of the endless moralizing from the cultural elite, found themselves admiring her poise, her restraint, her conviction. And somewhere, quietly and without fanfare, Melania Trump herself sent a brief private message to Karoline through a trusted intermediary. The contents of that message were never made public, but those close to Karoline said it left her moved in a way few things ever had. By the end of the week, as the dust settled, it was clear that a line had been drawn in the sand. Karoline Leavitt had crossed over from rising star to symbol, not just a press secretary, but a fighter for a forgotten dignity. A new voice in an era desperate for authenticity. She had faced down a legend and walked away taller, while the legend retreated into whispers of what once was. As for Meryl Streep, the woman who once commanded audiences with a mere glance, she found herself increasingly isolated. Invitations dried up. Commentators, even sympathetic ones, acknowledged that her meltdown had revealed something many had long suspected, but never dared say aloud. The cultural monarchy was crumbling. In the end, it was not a scandal or a controversy that brought it down. It was a confrontation, brutal, unscripted, undeniable, that had pulled back the curtain. No apologies, no retractions, no rewrites, just truth, standing tall for everyone to see. And so the story closed, not with the roar of applause, not with grand speeches or staged reconciliations, but with a simple, quiet truth. Sometimes the greatest revolutions start, not with armies or slogans, but with one voice refusing to be silenced. Karoline Leavitt had found hers, and the world would never quite be the same again.